What's up? Welcome to Journey in the South. I'm your host, Sarah. So, we're doing part four of Trump outsider or establishment. And we're live here on Facebook and YouTube. I'm using the application StreamYard so that we can, as we go through the information, that you can see it as well. So, there'll be a combination of documents that we'll go through. We'll have some video and audio commentary that we'll share, and the intent is to bring into the public awareness the type of connections that Donald Trump has. When he first entered into the political arena, he was touting the suggestion that he was an outsider. He was outside of the political arena, outside of the so-called establishment, or what he refers to as the deep state. And that suggestion was part of his appeal. People saw him as someone who was operating outside of the political realm, and those who are behind the scenes controlling the political discourse. But and his popular phrase was that he was coming in to drain the swamp of these influences. And so what we have been doing and will continue to do is to illuminate the fact that these very forces that he claims that he is going to drain the swamp of, instead he's part of the swamp, he's deep in the swamp, and he is currently continues to fill the swamp with the very people who he said that he was trying to rid from the political discourse. So there's a lot of information that I have. Some of it we'll do a brief review. In the past shows, we didn't have the opportunity to show the information, so I'll do that as well, and show some of the places where I've been able to obtain the information. I think I'll go ahead and start with more recent events, and then we'll just kind of circle back from where we started. So I'm going to share this particular article. Recently, I'm going to pick this one. Okay, so we're going to Wikipedia and go over the profile of one Scott Bessent. Scott Bessent, we see, is Trump's nominee to the position of Secretary of the Treasury. And we'll read his profile here. It says Scott Kenneth Homer Bessent is an American investor and hedge fund manager. He was a partner at Soros Fund Management. Yes, I did say Soros. And that is who we're referring to here. He was a partner at Soros Fund Management. And let me just, for austerity's sake, George Soros, founder of the Soros Fund Management Group, has been touted as the controller of the so-called uh, liberal wing of the Democratic Party, and has been the progenitor of a number of uh, liberal or left-wing organizations. Uh, Amongst those he financed were uh, the Black Lives Matter, once it had been co-opted by a group of black women and used as a means to tout black LGBTQ uh, interests. But we see that Scott Bessent uh, comes from the Soros organization. And, so that really just goes to show, and I'll show more information in this regard as we go through the information, to underscore the fact that though on the surface, these people purport to be or project themselves to be in opposition, in truth, there is no real opposition, that they're um, in control of both sides. And the whole, um, what the word I'm looking for, the opposition, is controlled opposition, is really just an illusion of opposition. The Democrat versus Republican, liberal versus conservative, left versus right, is just an illusory uh, construct for public consumption. Okay, so it goes on to say Bessent was a major donor, fundraiser, and an economic advisor for Donald Trump's 2024 presidential campaign. He was nominated in November 2024 as his nominee for Secretary of the Treasury. If confirmed by the United States Senate, he would be the second openly gay man to serve in the cabinet of the United States, after Pete Buttigieg, and the fourth openly gay man to serve in the cabinet level office, after Demetrios Marantes, Richard Grenell, and Buttigieg. As the Secretary of the Treasury is the fifth in the United States presidential line of succession, he will be the highest ranking openly LGBT, LGBT person in American history. It goes on to say, I'll skip a little ahead. He earned his bachelor's degree in political science at Yale University, where we know what is the secret society Skull and Bones, of which George Bush was a member, along with a number of people. I forget the person that George Bush ran against, but he was also a member of Skull and Bones. Okay, we'll skip. This is career. After graduation, he worked at Brown Brothers Harriman. Uh, Brown Brothers Harriman is an organization or an investment firm that George Bush's father worked for, and is also deeply connected to the Rothschilds. Thereafter, he joined Soros Fund Management and was a partner there throughout the 1990s, eventually becoming head of the London office. And we'll skip ahead a little bit more. board memberships. Besant sits on the University Council at Yale University. Besant is sister donated the Besant Library to Yale University. Besant has endowed 3 scholarships at Yale, one for students who are first generation college matriculants, one for students from South Carolina, and one for students from the Bronx. Besant chairs the investment committee as a member of the executive committee on the board of trustees of Rockefeller University. And then it goes on to say Besant is also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, which we've talked about in the past, and noted how the Council on Foreign Relations is an arm of the Rhodes Rothschild Secret Society, also known as the Roundtable Group. Okay, and with that, we will move on to a different document. Okay, so this document we used in the first program to provide some background in terms of how Trump began his political career, and even going back to Trump's ascension as a real estate investor and casino owner. And as we went through that information, we saw how Wilbur Ross was instrumental in his ascension, and going back even to some organizations that individuals and entities that helped Trump acquire his properties. Okay, so we'll just briefly and quickly go through that. As we went through that, we learned that Trump acquired his first casino in New Jersey from Resorts International. And here they talk about some of the information being brought to light in a book written by Michael Collins Piper, which was the book is entitled "The New Jerusalem: Zionist Power in America." And again, it goes into the background of Resorts International, showing the people who were involved in Resorts International, which was the prior owner of the casino that Donald Trump purchased. And so it goes on to show he purchased 93% of the voting stock in Resorts International. That Resorts International was established and controlled by front men for the Rockefeller and Rothschilds families and their forces in the CIA and the Mossad. Goes into the history of Resorts International emanating from CIA front company, which was initially called Mary Carter Paint Company. We see the book here. It shows how this front company was involved in a number of CIA operations, which included the plot to try to overthrow Fidel Castro. And then it shows some of the people who were involved in Mary Connor Pink, who ended up evolving into Resorts International. So here we see Meyer Lansky, David Rockefeller, the International Overseas Service, Tibor Rosenbaum, who was a financier who worked with the Mossad and was also Lansky's chief for, I guess, banker, if you will, for laundering money. And also arranged financing for covert arms deals. Baron Edmund de Rothschild of the European banking family, the Rothschilds. William Millen Hitchcock, one of the heirs of the Mellon family fortune. And, keep all these names in mind as we go through the information. And then one Meyer Lansky, who was a head of the Jewish mafia. Okay, and we talk here about Wilbur Ross, who, when Donald Trump was heading into bankruptcy in the wake of the real estate downturn and financial crisis in the 80s, he was about to default on a number of loans that he had for his various properties, and was on the verge of bankruptcy. And the banks were meeting to figure out how they were going to collect on their loans from Trump, particularly given the fact that he was had negative equity. So basically, the loans that he had outstanding, which were secured by his properties, the properties were worth less than the loans outstanding. So if they foreclosed on him, they were going to lose money. And he was on the verge of threatening bankruptcy. So Wilbur Ross, who worked for Rothschild Incorporated, stepped in and was able to negotiate a favorable deal with the banks to prevent him from going bankrupt. And he was able to recover from the imminent bankruptcy. But again, it was with the help of Wilbur Ross, who directly worked for the Rothschild Bank. And I'll play a little excerpt from this here.
If you lost your fortune today, what would you do tomorrow?
Maybe I'd run for president. I don't know.
Pomerantz represented them as a group.
How close was he to going personally bankrupt?
Very.
Trump makes a point of saying he never went personally bankrupt. But there's a reason why the banks decided to keep Trump whole.
We made the decision that he would be worth more alive to us than dead. Dead meaning in bankruptcy. We don't want him to be in bankruptcy. We want him out in the world selling these assets for us.
So you wanted him alive because he was a salesman and could best sell his own properties.
That's correct. We kept him alive to help us.
Okay. So here you just heard this individual, Alan Pomerantz, who also helped to negotiate on behalf of the banks to structure a deal. So he negotiated with Wilbur Ross and came up with a plan to forestall bankruptcy from Trump, and came up with a deal to basically rehabilitate him and his properties helped him recover. So here you see an article from Reuters. It says at the beginning of 1990, Trump owned a combined 4.4 billion to more than 70 banks, with 800 million personally guaranteed by his own assets, according to Alan Pomerantz, a lawyer whose team led negotiations between Trump and 72 banks to restructure Trump's loans. Pomerantz was hired by Citibank, a Rothschild bank, of course, but became lead counsel for the negotiations. Our The Spin, Trump bankers question his portrayal of financial comeback. He didn't have a large portfolio of real estate in New York, with the notable exceptions of his Fifth Avenue building, Trump Tower, completed in 1983, and the Plaza Hotel, which he bought in 1998 after borrowing heavily from Citibank. Again, this is a Rockefeller bank, and we talked about the connection between the Rockefellers and the Rothschild empire. Okay. Then goes on to provide some information about, Wilbur Ross. And Wilbur Ross, after helping to rehabilitate Trump, help him hold on to his properties, by pumping up his name. It says Trump nominated him and was confirmed to have him become Secretary of Commerce in his first administration. So again, while Trump had campaigned on the suggestion that he was going to be draining the swamp, a populist message, he did anything but that, particularly by bringing in Wilbur Ross. And he continues to do that, as we talked about, bringing in Mr. Scott Bessent, who we started out discussing. Okay, so some of this information here, we've talked about before, but again, we didn't have the opportunity to show you this information, so we're going to do this here. And of note, you'll see that a number of people who are part of Trump's cabinet come from the investment firm Goldman Sachs. And Goldman Sachs is notable because they've had a long role in government going back to the Bush administration, where Hank Paulson, who was formerly CEO of Goldman Sachs, had a stint as a Secretary of the Treasury. So again, not draining the swamp. Indeed, his initially Tony Scaramucci, who was like Trump's spokesman, he was also from Goldman Sachs. But to dispel the myth of Trump being anti-globalist, he says Trump could be one of the last great hopes for globalization. And they said this at the Davos meeting on the first day. Okay. So we're going to here highlight Rupert Murdoch. And Rupert Murdoch, if you don't know, controls the Fox Broadcasting Company. And as we know, Fox is basically Trump's media arm, very pro-Trump. But we read here that Rupert Murdoch says, Australian-born media mogul, member of the Council on Foreign Relations, which again, we noted the connection between the Council on Foreign Relations and the Rothschild family being an extension of the Rhodes Rothschild Secret Society. So Rupert Murdoch, Australian-born media mogul, member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and billionaire Rupert Murdoch has been friends with Baron Jacob Rothschild since the 1960s. Murdoch controls the Fox Broadcasting Company and was also schooled at Oxford, which is where the Rhodes Rothschild Secret Society was created. Murdoch jointly with Jacob Rothschild invested in a 5.5 stake in Genie, which conducts shale and oil explorations in, amongst others, Colorado and the occupied Golan Heights. This is in Kosovo. The International Crisis Group is active, funded by George Soros, Rupert Murdoch, Goldman Sachs, and J.P. Morgan, all Rothschild henchmen. Of particular note is the fact that in this International Crisis Group, funded by George Soros and Rupert Murdoch, okay, again, ostensibly on the surface, we would think that George Soros and Rupert Murdoch would be in opposition with each other, being that George Soros is touted to be a liberal and behind the so-called liberal or left-wing conspiracy. And Rupert Murdoch, who owns the conservative media Fox network, here you see that they work together. Okay, we see pictures here, which I was, of course, unable to show in our previous show because it was just radio. Here we can see Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, with Rupert Murdoch. Here we see one Ghislaine Maxwell and Rupert Murdoch. And of course, you know, if you don't recognize the name Ghislaine Maxwell, she was the arranger for one Jeffrey Epstein in his trysts with underage girls, and was convicted of assisting him. Okay, it goes on to say here, there's an article from the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. Trump names Jewish billionaire Steven Schwarzman to head his economic advisory team. It says that he is one of at least six members of the 16-member board who are Jewish or have Jewish ties. Others include Daniel Yergin, an authority on role energy plays and international affairs, Mike Weinberger, who was honored with the 2012 Anti-Defamation Achievement Award, Larry Fink, who helms BlackRock, an investment management firm, Bob Iger, the Disney CEO, and Kevin Walsh, a former governor of the Federal Reserve, who's married to Jane Lowder and heirs to the Lowder Cosmetics fortune. That's also of significance, noting that Zionists are a heavy player in the so-called establishment or deep state. And so seeing that Trump is in alliance with these people, again, belies the profile that he is anti-establishment or anti-deep state, as he would call it. Okay, it goes on to talk about Blackstone. Blackstone is one of the many investment funds of Jacob Rothschild. It says Blackstone Group was founded in 1985 by Peter George Peterson and Steven Schwarzman. And as again, we said Schwarzman became an economic advisor to Trump. in his previous administration. And here we see again Ghislaine Maxwell apparently at dinner with Stephen Schwarzman. And we get some information on Schwarzman indicating that Schwarzman was also initiated into the Skull and Bones in 1969. And Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin, who was formerly worked at Goldman Sachs and ended up later acquiring IndyMac Bank, which then later ended up becoming One West Bank after his foray as Treasury Secretary. No, actually it was before. Okay, so let's see. So in 2015, Jared and his brother Josh, with Ryan Williams of Blackstone, founded the investment firm Cadre. Christian partnered with BlackRock, and says the founder of BlackRock is Larry Fink. Which again was part of an advisory team of Trump's. And says Trump family invests most of their money in BlackRock investment funds. Okay, so now we'll go on to George Soros. Rothschild agent George Soros was involved with Trump in bankruptcy fraud in the General Motors building in New York. Soros, together with Goldman Sachs and Peter Thiel, funded the Cadre investment firm with $250 million in early 2015. Kushner forgot to disclose he's indebted for more than $1 billion to 20 investors, which BlackRock, Bank of America, Citigroup, UBS, Deutsche Bank, and Royal Bank of Scotland are amongst those. And of interest to us currently, Peter Thiel is the mentor of J.D. Vance, who is currently the vice president-elect with Trump. And here it says George Soros is quietly backing, financing Donald Trump's son-in-law's company, Cadre. I just talked about Mnuchin and IndyMac Bank, which ended up becoming One West after they acquired it when a number of banks failed in 2008 during the first financial crisis, or not first, but the one that preceded the one that occurred in 2008. Sorry. Okay, so we'll just go through these pictures really quickly. Here you see Jacob Rothschild along with Henry Kissinger. Kissinger would typically be a major advisor whenever there was a Republican in office. But here also you see him cuddling up with Hillary Clinton, a Democrat. Here you see Kissinger and Putin. Kissinger, mind you, is also a Zionist. Here we see Mr. Trump along with one Ghislaine Maxwell. And we talked about this before, but we weren't able to show the pictures, but I'm able to do that here now. Here the caption says Trump didn't fly Lolita Express, which was Epstein's plane or jet. But it says because Trump owned his own jet and would use those to fly to Epstein Island. But it says that Ghislaine would also travel on Trump's jets as a child with her father, Robert Maxwell, who was also a spy for the Mossad. So that basically just underscores the fact that there's been a long relationship between Trump and Ghislaine Maxwell. Here's a little information on Robert Maxwell. Not so much information, but just a little social information here about him traveling on his yacht, showing Ghislaine was there on the yacht with her father. Guests included Donald Trump, someone named former Senator John Tower, John Lehman, Tom Bolin, Thomas Pickering, Peter Calico, owner of the New York Post, Martha Smigielus was invited. Here we see Trump with Robert Maxwell here. There's Trump. Again, Robert Maxwell being Ghislaine Maxwell's father. And here in this publication, Mail Online, it says Jeffrey Epstein was secretly bankrolled by Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father. Here it says both the Clintons and Donald Trump were good friends with Jeffrey Epstein, who pleaded guilty to sexually abusing underage girls and running a pedophile sex ring. He was convicted, but he got a very light sentence initially until the more recent trial that landed him in jail, where he allegedly committed suicide. But here you see Trump along with Jeffrey Epstein, who of course he denied having any relationship with. You see a picture here of Ghislaine Maxwell with Sarah Ferguson of the Royals in England. Here you see a Rothschild family member along with Trump. Here's looks like a memo from Lynn Forrester to Bill Clinton. And it says, "It was a pleasure to see you recently at Senator Kennedy's house. There was too much discussed in too little time. Using my 15 seconds of access to discuss Jeffrey Epstein and the currency stabilization." Apparently she wanted to talk about some affirmative action program. And we see Hillary Clinton, Sir Evelyn de Rothschild, Bill Clinton, and Lynn Forrester de Rothschild, who had written this letter here. And then you see Donald Trump palling it up with the Clintons. And mind you, Donald Trump was a major donor for the Clintons earlier, before he ran against Hillary. Here we see Donald Trump with Melania, then Melania Knauss, later to be Melania Trump, and one Jeffrey Epstein, along with Ghislaine Maxwell. And here we see Donald Trump talking to Paris Hilton. You see Ghislaine Maxwell lurking in the background, licking her chops, hoping to recruit her for Jeffrey Epstein. And here we see Paris Hilton with Adnan Khashoggi, who we know from the Iran-Contra scandal, arms dealer, who worked with Oliver North in that whole situation. And then it goes on to name a number of people who were found in Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book, which include Donald Trump, Ivanka Trump, Evelyn de Rothschild, Jessica Rothschild, Hannah Rothschild, Edward de Rothschild, David Rockefeller, Peter Soros, nephew of George, Henry Kissinger, Rupert Murdoch, Alan Dershowitz, Ehud Barak, Tony Blair, former Prime Minister of England, the Duke of York, the Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson, Prince Bandar, Michael Prince of Yugoslavia, Prince Olga of Greece, Peter Mandelson, John Paulson, and David Koch, and a bunch with the surname Kennedy. Interesting. Here we see Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump, Trump's daughter, and Ehud Barak. Let's see what.
All right, Sagar, what's on your radar?
Yesterday, when I was preparing for the show, I noticed Alan Dershowitz's name was trending. That's usually a sign they said something which pissed off resistance liberals, but I looked into it just in case, and actually came away stunned. Dershowitz is in the midst of a campaign to try and clear his name after Jeffrey Epstein victim Virginia Giuffre accused him of once receiving sexual favors from her at one of the deceased monster's properties. Now, you may remember Giuffre as the victim who alleges that she was forced to perform sexual favors for Prince Andrew of the United Kingdom, prompting a disastrous interview for the prince with the BBC, in which he claims he's never even met Giuffre before, despite the existence of that photo, which shows his arm wrapped around her midriff. Andrew, for the record, claimed in that interview that the photo was doctored and now is stonewalling the FBI who seek to interview him on the subject, as we covered here earlier. Now, Giuffre's accusations against Dershowitz have come under renewed scrutiny after the release of a Netflix documentary on Epstein that was one of the most watched in America for a period of weeks. Dershowitz, in the course of litigation trying to clear his name, has access to some of Giuffre's accusations against other powerful people, which he decided to reveal. Some of the names are known to have been accused by Giuffre. One was not. Dershowitz's new court filings show that Giuffre alleges that along with Dershowitz and Prince Andrew, she was forced to have sex with former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, alongside prominent individuals like former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, former Democratic Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell, billionaire Thomas Pritzker of Hyatt Hotels, hedge fund manager Glenn Dubin, an unnamed foreign prince, an unnamed foreign president, and the owner of a French hotel chain, and lastly, Victoria's Secret owner Leslie Wexner. To be clear, this is an allegation. It is not proven. Nearly all of the men involved have issued a denial of either the specific accusation or having any knowledge of Epstein's predilections. But it is the inclusion of Barak and Wexner's name which raised quite a few eyebrows for those actually familiar with the Epstein case.
Okay, we'll move on. There's a lot of information still we haven't gotten to. We'll see CNN CEO Jeff Zucker, along with Ghislaine Maxwell. They talked about Peter Mandelson, who's a member of the Bilderberger Group. And I'm going to skip a little in the article here. It says Nathan Rothschild dated Ivanka Trump, the daughter of Donald Trump. Here's another picture of Ghislaine Maxwell with Abigail Kelm, rather. And apparently she's in clothing. Here it notes that both Coke and Pepsi are owned by BlackRock. Okay, so that's that. I'm going to now just play a 12-minute video by Makia Freeman of the Freedom Articles. And he's basically laying out the show, if you will, or of the election. And he also is of the same mindset about Trump. So let's hear what Makia has to say. And so what Markia said is true in regards to controlling both sides, and the information that we went through previously pretty much underscored that. They control both the left wing and the right wing, so it really doesn't matter who ends up being selected to the presidency and different posts in the government, because they're essentially all puppets. We talked about in previous shows the fallacy of the term anti-Semitic, and we've gone into that history. And we talked about the aim of the Zionists and their desire for world control. And I think so we really just see that this is all an illusion. Bringing us forward, I wanted to, also mention that. Okay, I mentioned the connection between different, or the connection that Goldman Sachs has and the relationship that they've always had with the government. So we're going to go kind of briefly into that really quickly. This is an older article, but it does show, the number of people who have come through Goldman Sachs to be in the government, and a number of people who served under Trump. Again, just to point out the fallacy of this notion of draining the swamp. Okay, so we'll see Steve Mnuchin was his Secretary of the Treasury, also Goldman Sachs alumni. Steve Bannon, who was his chief of staff, was also Goldman Sachs. It says Cohn, who had been picked to head the National Economic Council, was also ex-Goldman Sachs. I mentioned Scaramucci, who was his senior advisor and public affairs or media affairs spokesman. He was also Goldman Sachs. Then it goes on to identify a number of other people who served in the government who came from Goldman Sachs. We mentioned Steve Mnuchin. We mentioned Hank or Henry Paulson, who came from who was the CEO of Goldman Sachs. Was a partner, but he ended up ascending to CEO. He was formerly Secretary of the Treasury under, I believe it was George Bush the Younger. Robert Rubin, former Secretary of the Chair of the Treasury, who repealed the Glass-Steagall Act, which was a precursor to the 2008 financial crisis because it was the repealing of the Glass-Steagall Act, which blurred or basically eliminated the distinction or separation between commercial and investment banks, which then in turn allowed commercial banks to purchase securities and also to create securities and basically engage in investment banking, which is a much riskier type of proposition, business. Right? But it allowed commercial banks to engage in investment banking, which ended up being one of the things that spurred the financial crisis, as a number of the securities that were created by commercial banks under their investment banking arm included those mortgage-backed securities that were created from the adjustable rate mortgages, interest-only loans, and other hybrid products that brought people into the real estate market that shouldn't have been in there. Those got packaged into securities, and when they defaulted, that ended up creating the financial crisis. And then when the financial crisis occurred, you saw that amongst the first organizations and businesses that ended up getting bailed out was Goldman Sachs, whose representative was the sitting Secretary of the Treasury. So the people who ended up negotiating the bailout was someone who worked for one of the companies being bailed out, that being Goldman Sachs. So here it says when Goldman Sachs was receiving bailout money in the aftermath of the financial crisis, that was being negotiated by Paulson, who was then Secretary of the Treasury. Okay, so it says when Goldman was receiving bailout money in the aftermath of the financial crisis, Summers was not the only one in the Obama administration who had cashed checks from Goldman. Neil Kashkari, currently president of the Minneapolis Fed, left the bank with Hank Paulson, and started at the Treasury the same day as his recent colleague. He served as Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Financial Stability, administering the $10 billion TARP paid to his former employer. The TARP was bailout money paid to Goldman Sachs. And since James Donovan was also part of the Treasury, also someone from Goldman Sachs, someone here from William Dudley, president of the New York Fed and vice chair of the Federal Open Market Committee, also hails from Goldman Sachs. So there's influence over the Fed from Goldman Sachs as well. And then Goldman Sachs, as we talked about, has a connection to the Rothschilds, which we'll go into now. Okay, here, the banking houses of Morgan and Rockefeller, and Morgan and Rockefeller are essentially either United States agents of the Rothschilds. Okay, it says the four horsemen of banking, Bank of America, JP Morgan, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo own the four horsemen of oil. Okay, so those interlocking relationships between the families that control oil and control banking, and how make the point that the Federal Reserve is not a government agency. The Federal Reserve is a private corporation, which is owned, as private corporations are, by stockholders. And the Federal Reserve basically is the entity that controls the nation's money, the money supply. They create money and decide the amount of money in circulation. Okay, and so who owns the money-centered banks that own the Fed? Well, so the money-centered banks are basically composed of some of these banks here, which we just talked about: Bank of America, J.P. Morgan Chase, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo. So these entities are amongst those that control the Federal Reserve, along with what we talked about, the Brown Brothers, Harriman, Lehman Brothers. Okay, and then the stockholders of the money-centered banks, which are primarily the Rockefellers, the Morgans, and also some Rothschild Corporation shares. Okay, but it says that the information as to who are the stockholders of the money-centered banks is closely guarded. You can't get it. If this person tried to do so from the Freedom of Information Act. But it says a recent U.S. Trust Corporate Director and Honorary Trustee was Walter Rothschild. And they're talking about U.S. Trust, which is now owned by Bank of America. It says U.S. Trust, one of the trustees is Walter Rothschild, and then individuals from J.P. Morgan Chase, ExxonMobil, Citigroup, and someone from Morgan Stanley. It says that Saudis own 80% of the ownership in the New York Federal Reserve Bank. And the New York Fed is the primary Fed that ends up making the monetary decisions. It's controlled by 8 families, 4 of which reside in the United States: the Goldman Sachs, Rockefellers, Lehman's, Q, and Leaves of New York, Rothschilds of Paris and London, the Warburgs of Hamburg. The Warburgs were sent by the Rothschilds to start the Federal Reserve in the United States. The Lazards of Paris, who run Lazard Perez. CPA Charles D. Schauf corroborates McAllister's claims, adding that the 10 banks controlled all 12 Federal Reserve banks. He names N.M. Rothschild of London, Rothschild's Bank of Berlin, Warburg Bank of Hamburg, Warburg Bank of Amsterdam, Lehman Brothers of New York, Lazard Brothers of Paris, Kuhn Lee Bank of New York, Israel Moses Saif Bank of Italy, Goldman Sachs of New York, J.P. Morgan Chase of New York, South lists William Rockefeller, Paul Warburg, Jacob Schiff, and Jane Stillman as individuals who own large shares of the Fed. A good book gives you good information on that. He makes a reference to Eustace Mullins. I have that book, and he lays out the connections between the Fed and the families of the Rothschilds, Warburgs, Rockefellers, and the others. If you're interested in this information, I highly recommend that book, because this will give you the background of these banking companies, how the Federal Reserve was started, who were the players in starting it, and the significance of the Rothschilds in these circumstances. So that is the reason why we spent much time bringing to light the connection between Trump and the Rothschilds, because the Rothschilds are at the heart of whatever you want to refer to it, whether you call it the establishment, deep state, or whatever. They are behind the primary forces of control over world affairs, because they control finance. And here down lower, we'll see a quote from one of the Rothschilds who said, I know the quote, but I want to read it here so you don't think it's just coming straight from me. Here. I care not who controls a nation's political affairs so long as I control its currency. That's Meyer Amschel Rothschilds, who actually the quote that I read was, I care not who controls the nation's policy. So long as I control the money. Same thing. Maybe next time we'll go a little deeper into this, but this information basically shows the depth of control that the Rothschilds and the individuals that they are in alliance with. And here again, you see George Soros, who's closely allied with them, along with other wealthy aristocrats. We see Goldman Sachs prominent in this discussion. So the Warburgs, Kuhn leaves, Jake Goldman Sachs, Schiffs, and Rothschilds and intermarried into one big happy banking family. The Warburg family, which controls Deutsche Bank and BNP, tied up with the Rothschilds in 1814 in Hamburg, while Kuhn Lee powerhouse Jacob Schiff shared quarters with the Rothschilds in 1785. Schiff immigrated to America in 1865, joined forces with Abraham Kuhn, and married Solomon Leib's daughter. Leib and Kuhn married each other, and the Kuhn-Leib dynasty was consummated. Felix Warburg married Jacob Schiff's daughter. Warburg is notable. The Warburg family is notable again for beginning the Federal Reserve in this country. Here it says, two Goldman daughters married two sons of the Sachs family, creating Goldman Sachs. In 1806, Nathan Rothschild married the oldest daughter of Levi Barrett Cohen, a leading financier of London. Okay, and so you see these interlocking relationships, which form the basis of those who control world affairs, the International Banking Syndicate. Okay, so again, if Donald Trump was an outsider, he would not be in alliance with anyone who would be connected to the Rothschild family. Okay, so we'll probably go into this go into this in a little bit more detail, but I didn't want to do that here because we've actually gone into some of this information previously, and I haven't read all of this, but we have gone into this information before in previous shows. But again, the purpose of this really is to show who the so-called establishment is, and it's important to identify who they are, as we learned from Brother Steve Coakley, rather than using nebulous terms such as the deep state or the establishment. It's important to be able to identify who specifically we're talking about. Otherwise we're like just chasing ghosts. Okay, so I'm going to conclude with just playing a brief excerpt from a woman who also has a lot of hopefully you've been hearing the clips. I'm going to play another selection here. Hopefully you can hear it.
What's up, everyone? I'm Manar Adli, founder and director of Mint Press News and your host of the Mintcast. This is the official podcast of Mint Press News. Now, we'd appreciate it if you interacted with this video to help us beat social media suppression. So, as you can see, it is election season again here in the United States, and that means that the world's eyes are drawn to our corrupt two-party duopoly, with a rapidly aging Biden decaying right in front of us. Donald Trump is now a heavy favorite to become commander-in-chief of the United States empire once more. Now, Trump has chosen J.D. Vance as his running mate, a character made and financed by Silicon Valley and surveillance state billionaire Peter Thiel. It seems no matter who you vote for, our national security state and that of Israel's will be the winner. We have to remember that Peter Thiel's CIA tech empire, Palantir, helped Israel develop the AI Lavender system, which has been used by the Israeli military to target civilian homes, children, and completely decimate the world's largest concentration camp with precision. However, this is not Peter Thiel's first ride in the Trump campaign, as he helped bankroll Trump himself in the 2016 election and even worked in his cabinet. Now, despite Trump campaigning as a populist, anti-establishment, draining the swamp, he is the swamp, and he's planning on overfilling that swamp with figures like Peter Thiel, who will take our technocratic surveillance state and war machine to the next level, far worse than what we saw during COVID. And who better to help us learn more about this than one of the most important journalists of our time, Whitney Webb. She's the contributing editor of Unlimited Hangout and author of the book One Nation Under Blackmail. Whitney is also a former Mint Press investigative journalist. Whitney, it's great to have you on again.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me back on.
Well, first, I'd like to begin asking you about Peter Thiel himself. Trump's VP pick, J.D. Vance, presents himself, just like Trump, as a bit of a populist outsider. And you've noted in your reporting that his close connections with Silicon Valley billionaire Peter Thiel is poised to have unprecedented influence in a new Trump administration, and that this should deeply concern every American who cares about freedom, privacy, and reigning in the surveillance state. So talk to me about that first, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So J.D. Vance really owes both his political career and his previous venture capital career to Peter Thiel. For example, Peter Thiel first met J.D. Vance when J.D. Vance was in law school, and subsequently offered him his first job in venture capital at a Thiel created venture capital firm called Mithril Capital. After that, Vance went on to become involved with AOL co-founder Steve Case and Revolution Ventures, and managed a fund there called Rise of the Rest, I believe, which was heavily funded by the Walton family behind Walmart, Jeff Bezos, and a lot of prominent figures of the American oligarchy, and subsequently started his own venture capital firm, Narya Capital, with heavy backing again from Peter Thiel and also from Eric Schmidt, who's a major actually donor to Biden and intimately involved in Biden's science and tech policy. And actually, the two of them are on the steering committee of the rather infamous Bilderberg Conference, interestingly enough. And in addition, when Vance decided to run for office or for Senate, he was heavily funded by Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel donated $15 million to his campaign, which I believe at the time, and maybe still is, the largest donation, a single donation ever made to a Senate candidate. And then J.D. Vance ran initially sort of as a never Trumper and was very anti-Trump. And he became his vice presidential pick, arguably because that rocky relationship was soothed over by Peter Thiel personally, who took and accompanied J.D. Vance to Trump's Mar-a-Lago to sort of smooth over that relationship. And then Vance sort of became a big Trump proponent. Arguably, there's a lot of people have referred to Vance as a Peter Thiel protege. And I think, given the evidence, that's pretty fair. But Peter Thiel has several proteges. Vance is one in politics now, and obviously prominent in the Republican Party. But other noteworthy proteges include people like Sam Altman of OpenAI and WorldCoin, and also Palmer Luckey of the defense startup Anduril, and also of Oculus Rift, the virtual reality system that was sold to Facebook, which Peter Thiel, was on the board of from like 2005 until 2022, when he left to try and get Trump-aligned candidates elected. So Peter Thiel's important for a lot of reasons. I would start off with Peter Thiel by noting that he co-founded PayPal. And so PayPal is sort of one of these ubiquitous, financial sort of like fintech websites, one of the pioneers of the field, rather. And, from its earliest days, people that were involved in setting up PayPal, which includes people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, it's been said by the people who were making that company alongside them that they were in discussions with intelligence agencies and federal agencies from the very beginning about what, those entities were, what they would support in a fintech company, essentially. And, as I reported back when I wrote for Mint Press, the involvement of the now PayPal owner of the who created the Intercept and sort of privatized these Snowden leaks, and a lot of them ended up, never coming out. Allegedly, some of the ones that never came out documented in detail PayPal's relationship to intelligence that has supposedly been ongoing for some time. But aside from PayPal, the clear indicator of intelligence ties with Peter Thiel comes in the form of Palantir, which he incorporated in 2003, but which didn't really start as a company around 2004, 2005. Its first funder was the CIA's venture capital arm, In-Q-Tel. The CIA was its only client until 2008. And between 2005 and 2009, the top engineers at Palantir say they made over 200 visits to CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, where the CIA directly guided and tweaked, their software products, which are now used by intelligence agencies around the world, as well as healthcare agencies. The HHS and CDC in the US use Palantir, so does the UK's NHS, and it's expanded really throughout the world. What is really arguably a CIA front company, as I've written in past reports on Palantir, the reason, or rather that what Alex Karp and Peter Thiel were interested in doing when they created Palantir was essentially privatizing the Total Information Awareness Program that had just been defunded by Congress. Total information awareness is sort of an outgrowth of the Reagan-Bush era of domestic surveillance schemes, some of which came up during the Iran-Contra proceedings and are linked to things like the continuity of government protocols and the main core database, which are efforts to sort of label people label domestic dissidents as subversives, based on their online activity. And of course, in the 80s, it was based on other metrics, but now it's your online activity. So whatever data the NSA, for example, hoovers up about you, Palantir decides whether you're deemed subversive or not. And given the continuity of government protocols, which are still on the books, if the US government decides to invoke those, which can be under very vague circumstances, these people labeled subversives by Palantirs could have their constitutional rights suspended if those protocols are ever invoked. So Palantir's role in that, as far as the national security state goes, very nefarious, and they've been very involved in a lot of, other aspects of governance. It's gotten, increasingly bloated and large with over the years. It was intimately involved in Ukrainian military operations during the Ukraine-Russian conflict that's, of course, still ongoing, and are now playing an outsized role in Israel's war on Gaza, which is, as I'm sure Mint Press viewers know, is using AI to mass murder entire families. And Palantir is openly a big part of that, and they're very proud of that. And even when Peter Thiel was asked about that quite recently, he said his bias was to defer to Israel as it relates to the use of AI, this AI-powered war machine that's, committing genocide in the Gaza Strip. And there's a lot of other things to say about Palantir, too. I mean, this company really has a nefarious history. One of the things that a lot of people forget about them is that they created the first plan pitched to the federal government to destroy WikiLeaks and sort of what they called the WikiLeaks threat and stop, national security leak-based reporting. Talked about targeting people like Julian Assange and Glenn Greenwald specifically. So this is a company that doesn't value freedom of speech or freedom or your privacy or really, any constitutional right you have. And they directly enable, the warrantless spying on all Americans and use that to profile you on behalf of the national security state. And what's unfortunate, too, is that, we know how Peter Thiel's influence during Trump's first campaign translated into Palantir getting what the New York Times called a bonanza of contracts with the military, the U.S. military, and also with, even more so with U.S. intelligence. And now we also have, the other PayPal co-founder, Elon Musk, now deepening his ties with intelligence agencies through SpaceX, and which was, of course, already technically an intelligence contractor because Space Force is both part of the military and also an intelligence agency. And so really what you're seeing here is this particular faction of oligarchs, sometime referred to as the so-called PayPal mafia, which have their tendrils deeply embedded in both parties. You may have Peter Thiel on Republican, but you'll have Reid Hoffman and Pierre Omidyar on the Democrat side, for example, and then Elon Musk also now on the Republican side. But really, these are people that build de facto monopolies in direct connection with the U.S. national security state. And if you look at Palantir, it's very clear they care very little about our constitutional rights and freedoms. And despite perhaps, the rhetoric they may espouse publicly. And, it's very unfortunate that so many people believe with how they frame themselves rhetorically, because it goes very against their actions. For example, Peter Thiel is often referred to by others as a libertarian, but this is someone who says that he doesn't like free market competition because competition can negatively impact profits, and ultimately promotes the idea of, quartering a market and building a monopoly. And when he's done that, which he has, he's done it in direct collaboration from the very beginning with the U.S. national security state. So I would not call that libertarian. I think it's quite clearly fascist.
So, in conclusion, it seems that JD Vance is basically a patsy for Thiel and will represent Palantir's CIA tech empire interests.
Well, I think it's quite clear if you look at, just American politicians in general over the last 100 years plus, they tend to serve their biggest donors. Correct. And are influenced by their donors. And that's why, follow the money has always been so important when you're reporting on political realities or political figures in the United States. And I think it's abundantly clear that JD Vance has those kind of very deep connections to Peter Thiel, and his political career and his venture capitalist career would not have existed if it were not for him. And it's also important to point out that after the vice presidential announcement, you have close allies of Peter Thiel, whether it's Elon Musk or David Sachs or Palmer Luckey or Palantir itself, a Palantir co-founder alongside Thiel named Joe Lonsdale, all beginning to dump millions of dollars per month in the same super PAC that's supporting the Trump-Vance ticket, only after that VP announcement was made. So clearly it seems like that particular network is quite convinced that Vance is going to be their guy when in office. And it's worth pointing out that a lot of these guys are very interested in dominating the digital financial system to come. For example, Elon Musk says that he plans to turn X, Twitter, into half of the financial system. And JD Vance has been on the Senate Banking Committee. He's involved in crypto regulation legislation that's being written and drafted. And going to be put before Congress. And it's very likely that he'll be involved in choosing the kingmakers of that, like, PayPal's very own recently launched stablecoin, and any of these others, companies and currencies that they're, intimately connected to.
So it sounds like what you're talking about is being pushed by a PayPal mafia, an Orwellian programmable and surveillance money system that you've written quite extensively about. And how will the Trump administration advance this financial tech monopoly system?
And we're going to end it there. I will review this video and see how much we want to bring into the dialogue here. But the first part, I think, was relevant in that it underscores, again, the connection between Trump and the individuals who wield an inordinate amount of financial power, and underscores their connection to the traditional powers. So when people put forth Trump as someone who is against the so-called establishment, the New World Order, the deep state, or whatever euphemism you might want to choose, we see that Donald Trump is very deeply entrenched in that. And so the whole prospect, as Whitney Webb pointed out, and the host of this show pointed out, as did Makia Freeman, the prospect of draining the swamp is anything but that. He's just further filling the swamp and advancing their objectives. There was something I wanted to add to that. And as Whitney Webb pointed out about the following the money trail, I think is very useful to note that Trump also did get a significant donation from AIPAC, which is one of the main Zionist or Jewish political action committees. And one of the videos that was shown of Trump, the one where he was talking about so-called anti-Semitism, that was a speech being given to AIPAC. So again, if you're so-called anti-establishment, you would feel no compellment to appease those organizations. So we'll leave it there and pick this up again next time. I may take a break from the Trump thing for a minute, or not, because we're going to go into the inauguration soon. So I'll go where Spirit leads me to go. With that, we may pick it up again, or we may just do a show kind of like to put people in the right frame of mind to deal with what is coming ahead, and prepare and get us in the mindset for a positive 2025. So happy New Year to all of you who are on the East Coast time zone, and happy upcoming New Year for those who are on the West. I think we got about 3 more hours to go. Of course, this really isn't the new year because the new year actually starts in the spring, but under this calendar it is. So happy New Year to everyone, and hope you've found this informative, and we'll see you next time here on Journey to Self. So tap.